Have you ever wondered what women with long hair did in the 30s and 40s when the bob was the most fashionable hairstyle? Hello and welcome, I'm Maria from Sew Through Time, and this time we're making a faux bob tool or a hair waiver. Well, for a huge portion of the 20th century, basically started in the 19 teens and leading all the way up until the 1960s, short hair was by far the most fashionable. A lot of women decided not to cut their hair. Like always, there's always been women with different lengths of hair. And while one very valid way of styling 1940s hair with extremely long hair is just putting hair combs and leaving the back just long, and you do see this sometimes in pictures, but this is not a very practical style for everyday use. So what did women with really long hair do? Well, that is faux bobs. And if you've ever tried to make a faux bob with long hair, without any tools, it is kind of a tedious thing. And even if you do use things like scarves or hair rolls, it can oftentimes be a little tricky to get. And it can be something that takes time and effort and not necessarily an easy and fast hairstyle. Well, they had a hack for that, and they had these things called hair waivers. And because it is made out of wire, it is remoldable, so you can mold this to whatever you need in your hair, and you can tuck in the ends to hold it in place, or you can just form a really severe U shape to create that kind of page boy look. You can make this as professional looking and neat as you want. I just basically didn't bother, and mine looks kind of funky, but it does its job, and that's what it's important. And because if this is a daily tool, you don't need it to be that pretty. This needs to just be practical. Though this specific design is based on a 1930s design, very similar tools can be found from the 19 teens and 20s and all the way up until the 50s. You could use this for a 50s or 60s style by doing a French twist with this. Because basically, as long as you put the hair in between this and then roll or twist, you can do so many different kinds of hairstyles with this, not just a faux bob. The things you'll need to make one of these waiver tools is a heavier gauge wire. I used a 1mm stainless steel wire. You can use any wire as long as it's rust proof. And then you will need pliers to cut it, and then you will need some other kind of pliers that have like a soft edge that you can turn it, and then you'll need some sort of yarn in your hair shade or a similar shade of darkness, because you do want it to match fairly close to your hair so that if a part of it is visible, it is not super obvious. The originals of these had some rayon braiding around it, but I just used basically a wool knitting yarn that I just twirled around it. And wool is practical because this will felt in use. So eventually this will become less funky looking and neater looking. You could also just get wool felt and sew that onto this if you prefer. I started by measuring out 20 inches of my wire. You don't want to go much shorter than this, but you can go a little bit longer if you prefer. You want it to be long enough to reach from ear to ear in the position you're going to wear it. So if you plan on wearing it in that slight U shape, you want to measure it in that shape too. Then you want to bend the wire so that there's an 1 to 2 inch overlap between the wires. And then you want to make it elongated with kind of sharp turns, but still rounded turns. Then you take your pliers and you bend the ends to form kind of like hooks. On heavier gauge wire like this, it won't do a really sharp turn, and it doesn't really want to do this, but you want to get it somewhat close to each other so that once you hook them together, it doesn't come undone. You can, like I did, just put them first together and then start fiddling around with them, trying to get them a little bit closer. You can also sand that edge so that you can make sure that it doesn't hurt you if it does end up poking out. But I didn't bother. I just tried my best to get it close to the other wire so that it would stay even with it. Then once that's done, you want to take out some yarn. You don't want to measure out too little of this because otherwise you're constantly cutting new thread and adding new yarn to it. but you don't want it too long because otherwise it will get hard to work with. Then you fold that in half, and then you make a knot through that so that it is secured onto the wire. What I do is I form a loop of the yarn on one side of the wire, and then I grab both ends of the yarn from the opposite side of the wire so that this forms a knot around the wire. Then I twirl a few times around the wire just to secure some more of the length in place, and then I make those loop knots every once in a while to secure those in place. This way I make sure it doesn't start to unravel on me, but I don't have to constantly be knotting it. You could knot every single go if you want to, but it makes it a lot more tedious and harder to work with, and eventually it also starts getting tangled. So I find this a much easier way to work with it. You can also work with a single strand of yarn, but that is more tedious, and I find it easier to then just add more. And once I've wrapped the whole thing in yarn, I want to separate those two ends from each other that I've been working with and only take one and wrap that the opposite way that I have been wrapping around the thing. And then I want to knot that at least into a double knot, if not a triple knot. You can also work your way around it a few times just to make sure that that end piece doesn't open and come loose. And then you can cut any ends that are poking out, and now it's ready for use. To use this tool, put your ends through the middle part of the hair waiver. I just grab it, put it inside, and then I twirl the end in. I don't need to be really accurate with this. I don't need to get it all in there. As long as there's like no end sticking out in the end, that is the main point. So you want to make it so that it can sit semi-flat. And then once you're done with that, then you can twirl the hair around the entire thing. And here you can, as you work, you can make sure that it goes smoother and smaller so that you don't end up with that ginormous roll that is going to create that huge amount of volume. Once you get close to your head, you want to make sure that it's evenly throughout and on both sides, and that there is no weird clumps in one position or another, and you want to smooth this out as you go. You can leave like weird clumps inside the roll. It doesn't matter. As long as it's smooth on the very last bit of that roll, it will look good, and nobody will be able to tell what kind of mess is going on the inside. To secure this in place, I like to use really long bobby pins on the inside of the roll. So I grab just a teeny bit of the hair from the roll and then secure it onto my scalp so that it is strongly there and it's not going anywhere, because I hate the feeling of it moving around. Remember to smooth out that roll as you work and pin it in place, and especially those ends. It is very useful to do this in front of a mirror, but because I'm filming, obviously I don't have a mirror here, but that way you can really make sure that those ends of those rolls look nice. If you feel it's tricky to get those ends nice, you can always leave a little bit of hair outside of this tuck and then just do a finger roll around that very end, and that way you can secure it and make sure that there is always a pretty roll at the end. Just a few more bobby pins and this will be secure and nice. I wanted to play this in real time for you guys so that you really get an idea of how long this takes, or well, how little this takes, because this really is quick and easy. I'm working here without a mirror, with just the camera showing me a tiny bit every once in a while what I'm doing, and I can't really clearly see from that image, so this really is very fast and easy to work with. And then when I've worked it on smoothly so that it stays in place. For the very back, because my hair is so thick and the bobby pin doesn't work its way all the way through the hair, what I like to do is take a U-pin and secure the very back so that it actually stays in place and so that the hair stays there. Because now I have just basically smoothed out the very bottom of it. And with one or two of these in the center, I can actually secure the whole thing and it won't budge during the entire day. And there you have it, your vintage faux bob. And this is just one of the countless ways in which you can use this tool. With the exact same back roll, you could make this look completely different with doing 1930s finger waves around the face, or different sorts of rolls, or a pompadour. Or for an even more sneaky style, you can roll in the opposite direction so that the roll ends up underneath your hair. And that way you really can't tell that it isn't for real short hair. This style is slightly trickier to pin because you will have to mostly be working from the underside, but it is manageable and doesn't take many minutes longer than the original style. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button because it really does help out in this world. And let me know what kind of hairstyles you do if you try this tools. See you again next time. Bye!